Simulation Happy Hour acknowledges the land and the waters from which you are listening today. Welcome to Simulation Happy Hour. Sit back, relax, and let's talk about all things sim.
Hi everyone, my name's Jane.
Hi, I'm Jenny.
And today we're going to be talking with Liz Pizarro-Campagna and Simon D'Alfonso. And the topic of today is a research paper called A Pilot of Large Language Model Chatbot Simulation for Suicide Risk Assessment Training in Postgraduate Psychology. So before we start, it's lovely to meet you. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself? I'm going to start with Liz. Is that okay?
Sure. Hi, Jan. Thanks for having us. I'm Liz, and I am an academic at Australian Catholic University based in Melbourne, in Fitzroy. And I teach postgraduate psychology students here. I coordinate one of the postgrad psych programs, the Master of Professional Psychology. And as part of my broader academic role, I also do research, and some of the research that I've been doing lately has been collaboration with Simon, and we've been looking at tools, simulation tools, particularly the use of AI in training psychologists.
Great, thank you. Simon?
I'm Simon. I'm a senior lecturer in digital health from the School of Computing and Information Systems at the University of Melbourne. So I'm a computing guy, and my research explores the application of AI to mental health and psychology more generally.
Great, thank you. So I'm fascinated to talk to you, but before we go any further, I want to welcome our co-host Kerry, who has just joined us. Hi, Kerry.
Hi, Jane, and welcome to Simon and Liz as well.
Okay, so my first question is, what prompted you to explore AI chatbots as a simulation modality for suicide risk assessment?
Well, in training of postgraduate psychology students, one of the limitations that we have is that we don't really have very many opportunities for practice of the skills that students are learning. Main reason for that is because it's really expensive to pay actors to play the role of clients. So essentially we rely on role plays with their peers, which as educators, we know that it's, peers don't really simulate clients very well. They giggle, they don't stay in roles, so it's not very true to life, genuine, realistic practice for students. So I guess we've been trying to think about what can we do to create accessible, affordable, and scalable practices, tools to enable postgraduate psychology students to practice clinical skills before they go on placement, before they see real clients. And I guess with advancements in technology, we have some new tools available to us, and LLM chatbots is one of those potential, tools that has a lot of potential for being accessible, affordable, and scalable, and realistic, which is, I guess, really important, or more realistic than role playing with your peers.
Do you mind if I just go back a step and say, so we're talking about AI chatbots. What do you mean when we're talking about an AI chatbot? For our listeners, what are we talking about here?
So a chatbot, we've heard of ChatGPT these days, or I think most people have. It was around 2023, I think, that they're called large language models, started to become more prominent via systems such as OpenAI's ChatGPT and Google's Gemini platforms. And these frameworks and these systems make it easier these days to just craft your own prompt, send that prompt to the system, and tell it to act in a certain way and have a conversational engagement. So even 10 years ago, there was considerably more work involved in trying to get one of these chatbots off the ground, to create your own chatbot. It's become much easier over the last few years with these large language model systems that are readily available. So if you've used ChatGPT, that's what a chatbot is essentially.
Okay, so I'm going to follow that up with that. So is this a chatbot? So it's purely text, or are they verbally responding?
So we use these LLMs for our own platform, which we call Client 101. And Client 101 is a web platform that houses various chatbots that simulate mental health clients. The first modality is textual interaction. We are currently adding voice interaction to that. And perhaps a future possibility might be some visual node or an avatar.
Okay, great. Thank you. So did you want to tell us a bit about your research?
Oh, so I guess to extend on that sort of broader challenge of trying to think of ways to provide better scaffolded and more realistic simulation practice for postgrad psychology students, one of the areas that is really important and pressing and in need of further practice is where there's risk to clients. So looking at using chatbots to allow students to practice suicide risk assessment skills, we felt was really important. And the literature shows that graduates and early career psychologists don't feel confident in undertaking suicide risk assessments, and in fact often will avoid it, which obviously puts clients at risk. Working with Simon, we developed a chatbot called Kyle within the Client 101 platform that would simulate a client presenting with depressive symptoms, but particularly who would present with a medium suicide risk, that would allow the students to practice a suicide risk assessment. So that's kind of the beginning of the project, is the idea of developing a chatbot for students to practice suicide risk assessment. So from that, I suppose we ran a pilot last year, and we were wanting to ask, I guess, two main questions that we explored quantitatively and also qualitatively. And this was a collaboration. There was contribution from a number of people, including two of my students. So I had an honours student, and also so Hannah Giddy was my honours student, and I had Cassandra Mount, who was a master's student who was completing a clinical master's degree. And so they looked at qualitative and quantitative aspects of the research question, which was, is it useful? Do students, do postgrad psychology students find it useful, beneficial to practice suicide risk assessments with a chatbot? And does it improve their self-efficacy in undertaking suicide risk assessments? So that was our research question.
Great. And what did you find?
What did we find? So we found that, yes, they did really enjoy interacting with the chatbot and practicing suicide risk assessment skills. They found that we found that it improved their self-efficacy. So we got them to practice 4 times. So it was very structured and time-limited study. So we invited them to participate immediately after they had completed training in suicide risk assessment. So they completed a unit in the postgraduate program that teaches them how to do suicide risk assessment. And then following that, they were invited to participate in the chatbot. So we wanted to make sure that they'd had the training. This wasn't a training tool, but rather a practice tool. And so we invited them to practice 4 times over a period of 4 weeks. So once a week over 4 weeks. And this was scheduled. And it was done online remotely. They didn't have to come in. So it was very practical and accessible for them. And we measured, so they completed very brief online questionnaires at baseline, so before any practice, and then after each of the 4 practices as well. And what we measured on each occasion was their self-efficacy. So it was a very brief self-efficacy and risk assessment tool. And at the very end, we also asked them some questions about acceptability. So how useful, beneficial, and acceptable they found the tool. And yeah, we found that they enjoyed interacting with it. They found it beneficial. They found it useful. And it was quite consistent across the quantitative and qualitative findings. We did find that the number of practices mattered. So the benefit was in the quantitative data, we saw benefit at week 3 and week 4 compared to their baseline level of self-efficacy. So the first practice, we didn't find a significant difference. So it took a few practices, which I guess is consistent with learning theory that says that, practice is really important for increasing skill and self-efficacy. We did find, though, that there were some limitations to that. So, it wasn't perfect, and the students did. So in the qualitative data, some of what came up in that was really interesting and helpful in terms of, future development of these types of tools. That one of the challenges was obviously that what we used was only text-based, and so the students weren't able to see a client. And when you're working with clients, you really rely on those non-verbal cues. You rely on body language. You rely on the tone of the voice and other such cues. And so obviously you don't have that when you're interacting with text. So that was a limitation. And the other one was repetition. So because it was a pilot, we only had one client. We had Kyle. So there was between session repetition because they practiced on each occasion with Kyle. So obviously practicing with the same client was repetitious. But I guess more interesting was that within session repetition, where sometimes the student would try to ask a question in a different way to try and, undertake a more thorough assessment, but the chatbot would respond with almost an identical response, which is, one of the limitations. And Simon could probably talk a little bit more to that and what work we're doing and thinking of. And
Sure. So client evolution is an active research and development problem, trying to get the chatbots to organically or inorganically develop, especially if a student will be interacting with the same chatbot on more than one occasion. In this case, there was this caveat that we actually created 4 instances of Kyle 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we deliberately made each instance a fresh slate when the student started with that instance for the week. So there was bound to be repetition there just because of the structure of the study. But at any rate, this idea of trying to have a chatbot somewhat evolve as a student comes back to it the second week, the third week. So there is some type of something developing, I suppose. And we have some basic mechanisms at play. We now have a memory functionality whereby, say, a summary of previous sessions will be appended to the current prompt that we send to the large language model. And you'll just have an instruction like, in formulating your, next response, you can consider all these bits of previous information that have occurred in the sessions. And then you could even do possible things like, if there's something out in the real world that's happened, you can drag that bit of news into the context and tell the chatbot about that. So just pretend like that the chatbot is this entity in the real world that is learning some new things throughout the week prior to having the next session with the therapist.
Can you talk me through a session, as in they've got 4 sessions, so the student would come in and use or be allowed to use the chatbot just once and have a conversation? Is that what you're saying?
The students had access to the chatbot for the 4-week period, and they could access it at any time, but to prevent that, we created a schedule. So the students who were working on the project collaborated with the participant to create a schedule of practice so that each participant was practicing only once per week over that 4-week period. And when we look at the data, we can confirm that is what happened, that participants were practicing once a week over the 4-week period.
So they just had one conversation with the chatbot. Is that what they're doing?
One per week over 4 weeks. Though some students sometimes doubled up, they were only supposed to interact with the first instance of Kyle once in the first week, but they might have done it twice when they weren't supposed to, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I've got a question, please, Jane. I'm really curious. Suicide risk assessment, what safety did you put in around, or what were your safety considerations in building this scenarios, and and how did you manage student stress?
If I could flip that question around, actually, because one of the things that we're trying to do here is in some ways expose the students to the stress that they will encounter when they're undertaking suicide risk assessment. So in training psychologists, we're preparing them to work with clients and people in distress, people who are unpredictable. They don't come with a script and you never know what a client is going to share with you. And one of those things that clients share with you is suicidal risk. And they, don't necessarily come out with it immediately. It's something that you have to kind of be attuned to and know what you're listening for, looking out for, knowing how to ask the questions in a sensitive way, but that is also able to elicit that information from a client so that you can support them. So I guess we're not trying to protect the students from distress. We are wanting them to experience as realistic as we can what it is to come in contact with a distressed client who might be presenting with suicidal risk. And I guess if we're sort of thinking of guardrails, because this was a pilot, we invited students who had already received suicide risk assessment training. And these are provisionally registered psychologists in their 5th year of training. So that's really the main guardrail, that they've got a fair bit of training under their belt already. They're provisionally registered psychologists and had suicide risk assessment training. But the actual practice with the chatbot itself, we weren't trying to protect them from distress, I guess.
Although you did provide some reminders and links to mental health service resources if they just wanted to debrief afterwards.
Yes. Yeah, we did. Concerned. So we provided the lifeline number, and also within the university we offer there's free counselling that is separate from the psych training discipline, and we reminded students that they have access to that.
Lovely, thank you.
I'm just going to ask Kerry if you've got any questions.
Sorry, there's a bit of echo here, but I'm just wondering if you had a takeaway for educators seriously experimenting with AI, what would it be?
I didn't quite catch that, sorry.
I think what Kerry was asking, Liz, was if you had a takeaway message for educators. Is that it, Kerry? Yeah. What would be your takeaway message for educators in working with chatbots and AI?
So I think the first important
Simon's
point
done
to
heaps of
make
work,
now
yeah.
is that the possibilities and opportunities are ripe now. The entry barriers are pretty low to just trying to find, you do a Google search if you're interested in this, and you will probably find some option to just set up something relatively easy and just start experimenting. You can craft your own prompts that can influence what you want to generate and just see how you go.
So, what do I have to have any knowledge, Simon? I've got no experience.
Yeah, so to have a really, really basic system, you don't need to have any knowledge. You can try out your own, go into ChatGPT and prompt it to behave in a certain way. So write a prompt, go, you are this type of client, these are some of your characteristics. Now respond to me as if I am a therapist and we are having a conversation, and it would go back and forth as a starting point. But then to use these technologies and develop your own platform, obviously you need to have some web development experience and know how to call what are called application programming interfaces and all this stuff. But there are individuals like myself who know how to do the computing things, and we're open to collaborations and such. And there are others like me out there probably. So just find some computing people, I suppose, who'd be interested in working together. If you're, say, from the mental health disciplines or the allied health services, and try it out.
I think if I could add to that a little bit, I wouldn't have been able to develop this on my own. Working with Simon really helped guide how you develop a prompt for a client. We also trialed it, obviously. We tested it out before getting the student, before running the pilot. We tested it with staff, we played around with it, we challenged it, we did all sorts of things to make sure that it was acting like a client. So we did have to tweak and change the prompt. And it's, there's still some things that we'd like to work on, but having, Simon to guide that because of his expertise was really important, I think.
Yeah, so like some tweaks will sometimes inevitably require some technical expertise. One example being, so these large language models, ChatGPT, etc., you may have heard out of the box, these systems are very sycophantic or can be sycophantic and overly compliant. But if you want to simulate a mental health client, you want some resistance and some complications. On the other hand, you can't just simply put in the prompt hard code, be more resistant, because then it will be overly resistant. They tend to go towards extremes. So to get some sweet spot in the middle and have a reasonable degree of maybe resistance that then reduces over time, you need to do some technical things in the background to achieve that. And we're still experimenting with that.
Is there a way to get the prompt to have some consistency about the conversations it's having, and make sure that it's clinically safe? Because if you put something into ChatGPT, as a skeptic, I'm saying it could come out with anything. No?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question because when working with real life clients, they're not clinically safe, right? They share things that might trigger a student, that a student might actually relate to. It might genuinely distress them. If a client is sharing about an experience, a trauma that a student can relate to, that's realistic. So I think it's really different if you're developing therapy bots. I think that's when that's really important. But for this, I guess we give it the prompt, and Simon can talk a little bit more to the technicalities of it, but it's not when the student is actually playing the therapist and the client and the chatbot is playing a client. It is genuine when a client responds in a way that is distressing to the student. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess we all come from a nursing background, where perhaps if we were developing a chatbot, we may need some more consistency or some specific things that remain the same with the person. Noting that you've just said to us that these are fifth year, already trained, so the risk is less perhaps. Giving those scenarios to an untrained person may be more stressful. I think that's where I'm thinking of the parameters.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And
Consistency.
our audience will be looking at implementing things for a wide range of people.
Yeah, in the earlier stages, you're right. Consistency and training wheels are more important. I think that type of thing can be implemented, firstly, by just having a prompt of a certain nature and ensuring that it's consistently used. And secondly, you can do some extra things on top, some wrappers around what you're doing with a large language model to just ensure that things are consistent and safe. But also, as Liz said, unlike using chatbots for, say, virtual therapy, where safety is paramount, and you want to have safety guardrails, at this stage, having a chatbot that is perhaps a bit unpredictable or open, it's not that much of an issue, because that is essentially what students are going to have to encounter in their real practice.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, that you're actually wanting that unpredictability, and you don't mind that there's different responses from the chatbot. Jenny, Kerry, have you got any other questions that you'd like to ask?
I've got one. I'm super curious. Where to from here? What happens next for your project, or how else you're going to develop the chatbots? You said that your students got improvement. Is there a next step now?
We do have a current project underway where we are going to be getting experienced psychologists to score the transcripts. So when we had the practices, the pilot that we ran last year, part of the data that we generated were the transcripts, the text-based transcripts. So we will be engaging 3 psychologists to use some validated tools to assess whether there was improvement from practice to practice, or across the 4 practices, in the core counselling skills and also the suicide risk assessment skills that students attempted during their practice. So that's one of the things that we're going to be doing this year. I mean, Simon can talk a little bit more to the technical analyses of some of the language data.
So it's part of a broader endeavour. Using chatbots to simulate practice opportunities, counselling, psychotherapy scenarios is one half, the first half of things. I see the second half as being using natural language processing to provide opportunities to give automated feedback to students and educators. So, say in the psychology, the therapy world, there are various scales that exist to rate the quality of how a practitioner is doing. So you get a transcript, say for cognitive behavioral therapy, there's a scale called the CTRS, via which a session can be scored for how well it is adhering its fidelity to CBT practices. This is traditionally a very laborious process. A human who knows their stuff has to go over the transcript and annotate it manually. Okay, could we develop machine learning models that can just get the transcript of a session and provide an automated evaluation of it? And that's what we're also looking into as a research area. And this is one way we can do it with the data we generated with Liz last year from our study. We have about 60 transcripts to begin with. We're going to annotate them and then use a machine learning model to explore some training prediction models.
That's pretty exciting. So you're going to do a comparison between the live people and the chatbot analysis? Or is that 2 separate projects?
So the human annotators that Liz alluded to will do their own scoring, and then we'll get some inter-rater reliability to make sure everything's okay there. And then, as you standard in machine learning, you get some percentage of your labeled transcripts as your training data set, and then you leave some aside as your test data set to make sure that your model is doing a decent job of predicting outside of what it's been trained on.
Oh, thanks, Simon.
It is really exciting, and it's one of the things that our academic staff here have asked. It's one of the first things they ask. So do students get feedback when they are practicing with the chatbot, or are they just practicing? And at the moment, they were just practicing. So the idea is to be able to develop, as Simon explained, some automated feedback that is based on expert ratings, so that students can get some guidance as they go and some immediate feedback.
Well, thank you. That's been amazing. I think I can hand over to Jenny for our final question, which is the important one, isn't it, Jenny?
So at each session, we like to ask our guests, if you could be having a drink anywhere in the world, what would that drink be, and where would you be, Liz?
Oh my gosh.
Simon, do you have one?
I do, probably.
Well,
I mean, I have more than one, actually.
You came prepared.
So one would be an Aperol Spritz somewhere on the southern Italian coast.
Nice. And any more? Where else would you like to be in drinking?
Maybe in wintertime, some mulled wine somewhere a bit further north in Europe.
Yeah, nice.
Okay, now that I've had a moment to think about it, I don't know, I'd probably be having a Chilean red wine from the Valle del Elqui with my family in Chile.
Beautiful. Sounds nice. I'll happy to join you on both of those occasions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now we do have Mel online who